So my name is Julian. I'm a technical evangelist with AWS, and sometimes I work in the Paris office, but most of the time I'm just traveling to meet all of you and hopefully talk about cool stuff. So my session today will focus on what we call developer tools, and namely, I'm going to talk about the what I call the code star product. So code commit, code deploy, and code pipeline. We have about 40 minutes. I'll try to keep that time. So I have a few slides, but really just a few to go through, and hopefully you can go really quick into the demo, which I think is the most interesting part, and the part where you can actually look at those tools and see how they work. So a couple of points before I start. So this is definitely not an introduction to DevOps. So if you have zero idea what DevOps is, and if you were looking for a tutorial on DevOps, sorry, this really isn't it. So you can try and find another session if you want. That's okay. I won't be offended. And the second thing I want to say is I'm assuming that you're reasonably familiar with the EC2 and ELBs and auto-scaling groups and the core. We have more seats around here. Come on, come here. Don't stand. Keep your energy for the long day. So I'm assuming you're reasonably familiar with those core concepts, okay? So having said that, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer all questions, especially during the demo. So if there's something that doesn't make any sense, which is very possible since I landed at 4:30 this morning and didn't sleep on the plane. So if I don't make any sense, please raise your hand and ask questions, okay? All right, so let's get started. Let's get to the good stuff. So this should be rather familiar to everybody, right? So who is actually practicing that? Who is actually doing this on a daily basis? All right. Who would love to be doing this on a daily basis? Come on, all of you. Who would rather release once a year? Okay, so, yeah, well, and be on holiday half the time. Yeah, I know, me too. Only have all of the time. Oh no. So to make a long story short, this is the DevOps dream, so to speak. This is how everyone is trying to release code these days. We're trying to move away from monolithic, bulky applications, and we're trying to break them into tiny pieces that people can work on in parallel, and that different teams can deliver and release and maintain totally in parallel. So it's a nice dream, and it can be really difficult to get there, but some companies are doing it. And one of those companies you may have heard about is called Amazon.com. And again, to make a long story short, they moved about over 10 years ago from a very monolithic application to thousands of services and microservices being built, developed, and deployed totally independently. And today, so at Amazon.com, you have thousands of teams working on a microservice architecture, so thousands of services, all of them being released using continuous delivery in many environments, development, staging, pre-production, production, and whatnot. And so those are numbers from 2014, so you could expect them to be even higher today. And so that means Amazon.com is doing over 50 million deployments every year. And so that means more than one deployment every second, right? So every second, count to 10, right, in your head. Well, 10 services have been deployed on Amazon.com. It's a crazy number. And it's probably even more than that. So what these numbers tell me is that of course, you cannot do this if it's not totally automated. I mean, humans don't really work well for seconds. Anything takes more than a second, and for me, it's usually hours. So it needs to be fully automated. And so the software factory that you need to do something like this, even at a much smaller scale, is going to look like that. So of course, it's always going to start with your source code. It needs to be safely stored and versioned into a source management system. And this is where a code commit is going to come into play. You're going to build that code, depending on your technology. And then you're going to deploy it on multiple environments, right? No one deploys directly to production, right? Right? No one will admit that they really only deploy in production, right? Yeah, your boss could be in the room, you never know. Plus, we're filmed, so yeah, no one deploys in production directly. So of course, you're going to deploy to a testing environment and a staging environment and pre-production maybe for load testing or security testing, God knows what. And then once you're happy with all your test criteria, you're going to release to production. Okay, so you need to manage multiple deployments over multiple server farms, and so this will be the role of code deploy. And these are just basic tools, right? But the winning factor is really when you can integrate all of them easily and make sure that every single step is always enforced, right? That you have a sequence of operations that always happens, no matter what the deployment, and that you will never get to production unless all these steps have been performed successfully. And that's the best way to guarantee the quality of your application, okay? So we're going to look quickly at the core features and the core abstractions of code commit, code deploy, and code pipeline. And then we'll start playing with the demo and do some silly stuff, I hope. So code commit, there's really hardly anything to say about it. I could just say this is a managed Git service and stop right there. So this is a managed Git service, but I still need to say a few things about it. So the good thing is you can use your standard Git tools, right? So either the Git command line or your favorite Git GUI tool, whatever. The second nice thing about it is that it is hosted within AWS. So you get all the good stuff that usually you get from AWS, so scalability, high availability, security, etc. You don't have to worry about managing your private Git repo, which is a very critical part of your infrastructure, right? Because if it breaks, you're not able to deploy anymore. So I guess that's a big problem. And so you can also automatically encrypt all your files, so you shouldn't have any concern about your intellectual property being hosted on AWS. Okay, so the bottom line is it's managed Git, and you get all the benefits from a managed service, right? Code deploy. So the name is pretty obvious. This is about deploying applications. So the nice thing about code deploy is that it's actually very simple to set up. I will show you some examples. So you're going to define what your application is, what is the pool of virtual machines or instances you want to deploy this application on, a few other criteria, and that's it. So it's really, it's a very, very simple way to do your own deployments. It will scale easily. So if you need to deploy on hundreds of servers, that shouldn't be a problem. And as we will see in a second, you can deploy to actually instances or physical servers. So the first important thing about code deploy is that it requires an agent. So you have a small agent which is available on GitHub. So you can look at the sources. It's a Ruby code. It's not a lot of code. It's available for Linux and Windows. And so the purpose of the agent will be to poll the code deploy backend to see if a new version is ready to be deployed or not. Okay. And so, as I just mentioned, code deploy can deploy on obviously EC2 instances, right? I suspect this will be the main use case. It can deploy to auto-scaling groups as well, so that's really nice. We'll try to do this later. It worked this morning, so hopefully it will work today again. And you can deploy to on-premise servers. So that's actually nice because if you have servers, physical servers in your data center and you have deployment issues, well, you could use code deploy as a standalone tool to deploy your applications on your servers. And of course, if you have hybrid architectures, you could use code deploy to deploy on the physical servers and on the virtual machines in a totally identical way. Okay. So there's just a little bit of configuration to enable code deploy on an instance. So the most typical way to do it is to use user data, right? So for those of you who might not know what user data is, it's an initialization script that you pass to a newly launched instance, right? When you click the friendly blue button in the console that says launch instance, one of those screens allows you to enter a small script that will be run when the instance starts. Okay, so as you can see, this is enough. This is actually what I'm using. So you're going to make sure you have the latest version of the AWS CLI, which is always a good thing. And then we're going to get the code deploy package from S3, and we're going to install it, and we're going to start the service. Right, that's it. So it's not, nothing complicated about doing that on the fly. Of course, you could put that in your own image directly. There are many ways to do it, but the bottom line is those 3-4 lines of script will enable code deploy for that instance. So let's look at some vocabulary and some concepts. So deployment is about 3 things. What am I deploying? Where am I deploying it? And how am I deploying it? That's it, right? Sounds simple. So what are you deploying? Well, you're deploying a piece of code, right? So it could be again, depending on what language you use, could be different things, but okay, you're deploying source code, okay? And on top of that, I will show you an example later on. We need to deploy an application specification file. So it's a small configuration file that allows you to insert some hooks for deployment, right? So you have actions to start the application, you have actions to do before the application start, after the application start, you have actions to check that the application works, etc. So basically it's mainly hooks, right? So once you've define this, right? The what, so the code, the version code, and the app spec file. You might wonder about the where part. So you want to deploy on servers, I guess. That would make sense. So you're going to define what AWS calls a deployment group. So a deployment group is a set of servers. It could be, again, physical servers, could be EC2 instances, could be auto-scaling groups, where that application, that version code is going to be deployed. Okay, so we'll see how a deployment group, how we actually reference those instances in the deployment group. It's very simple. And then the how do you do it? So you have different rules on how you do the deployment. So if you could do all instances, all servers at a time, right? So for, I guess, a development environment, it's fine. For production, not so much, right? No one does that, right? Right. You all do testing and you all do rolling deployments, especially you, sir. I know it. Right? So the all at once is nice for development, right? Not for production. You could do half instances, the first half and then the second half, if you want to go really fast. Or you can do what I think is the best way. You could do one at a time, right? You can do really a rolling deployment and upgrade each instance after the next. So deploy one, make sure it works. Deploy the next one, make sure it works, etc. Right? So we'll see how that works. Okay, but this is about it, right? So you see, you don't have a million parameters to worry about. And last but not least, code pipeline. So code pipeline is about integrating all those steps, defining a sequence of operations that need to run successfully before you actually hit the last step, which is deploying to production, right? So typically you will have a source step where you will grab your sources from GitHub or code pipeline or S3 maybe. You're going to build them. You're going to deploy them to a first environment. Let's call it beta. And then you could deploy to a second environment for maybe load testing or user acceptance testing. And then you could deploy to a final environment, which is production, right? So the only thing that the pipeline actually does is make sure you don't go to the next step if something didn't work, right? And that's the best way to deliver working code. Make sure it works and stop if it doesn't and alert, right? And unfortunately, humans are not really good at that, so you want to automate that. So here's an example. I will show you the console in a minute. So a source step, which is grabbing sources from GitHub. Then a build step, which is using Jenkins to build it. And you can see within the build phase, you can have different actions going in parallel. And then once the build is successful, we can do the deployment to an environment, etc. Right? So you really build this pipeline like this. You build it visually and integrate all the steps. And again, it's a very easy way to do that. Another cool thing is that, of course, you guys are using many, many different tools. And lots of them, hopefully all of them, are compatible with either code deploy or code pipeline. So I don't have enough time to cover them all, but you see the list. Sorry, you see the list here. And I will show you today. We'll look at GitHub and Jenkins, but all these other tools work with code deploy or code pipeline. So you can mix your own existing tools with maybe AWS tools, or you can maybe only use the pipeline to integrate all your external tools. That's fine too. Okay. All right. Time to before we jump into the demo and go crazy. Do we have any questions on that?
Yeah.
Please.
My name is David. I'm from Peru. My question is, why doesn't Code Pipeline today support code commit?
It does. It's very recent. I'll show you in a second. It's fairly recent, so it's given the number of features that we release, God knows I miss half of them. So it's perfectly possible that you missed it. So. No offense, but it's fairly new. I'll show you in a second. Does code pipeline support OpsWorks? We'll check right away. I don't use OpsWorks a lot. I shouldn't say that, but I suspect I'm not alone. I don't know. It's always very difficult to comment on what's coming, but I can take a quick look at what I know and answer you after the presentation. Okay. Other questions? All right. So let's go. So what I'm going to do, actually, I like to do demos that you guys can do as well, right? Because I think it's always frustrating when you see a demo. And it feels like some stuff is hidden, or maybe I was just too fast showing stuff, and people send me questions later on saying, oh, I missed this and I missed that, and so I love getting emails, but I'd rather make sure you guys are able to rebuild everything. So my starting point is this blog post from AWS solution architects and product managers. So it's based on the CloudFormation template, which I'll show you in just an instant. So it builds a Jenkins server and some web servers that you can start to play with, and a basic pipeline. Okay, so we'll start from there, and we'll add auto scaling and do some other stuff. Okay, but this is the starting point. Okay, you will get the slides at some point later on, so don't worry about it. Okay, so let's go. All right, so this is the blog post itself, right? Right, you saw it. And so the starting point here, don't worry, we will not go into a lot of detail on CloudFormation. But who has never heard of CloudFormation? No one? Wow, I'm impressed. Okay. So just in case somebody hadn't heard of CloudFormation, this is infrastructure as code. And so basically, it's a way to describe your infrastructure using a JSON document, which we call a stack. And as you can see, we can define IP ranges and instances and VPCs and everything. All right. So this one is a little long. It's about 15 pages long. So don't worry, this isn't the topic for today. But all right, this is where you start. You run this CloudFormation template, and it's going to create the Jenkins server and the basic pipeline. Okay. Okay. So once you've run it, you get the friendly create complete message. It's always nice when you do CloudFormation stuff, right? And so we've built an S3 bucket, we've built a VPC, some EC2 instances, and a pipeline as well. Okay. So this is what the pipeline looks like, and I'm going to show you a few things here. Okay. So I have a source step, pulling from GitHub. Okay. From my repo, okay, which is just a fork of the official example, but I like to tweak it, so I have to have my own fork. So a source step, right, which is just fetching the sources and putting them in S3. A build step, so I have a Jenkins server, which is here, which is going to build. It's a Tomcat application, so it's going to generate the deployment package. And then I'm deploying to a first deployment group, which is called beta deploy. And all this stuff happens automatically, as you will see. And then, right, on this arrow, which we call a transition, we were able to disable transitions. So this one will be automatic, right? This one will not. And maybe you want to do some manual testing before you actually deploy from beta to prod, right? So I'm going to stop there, make sure my beta server works, and then I will re-enable that transition. And I've got another deployment group for auto-scaling, which we'll look at later on. So if you want to change that, you can just edit it, right? So I could look at the application source. Sorry, the category, so that's the source step, right? And we have code commit in here for the gentleman who asked the question earlier on. But once again, it's fairly new, so it's okay if you missed it. No worries. Okay, so I'm pulling from GitHub, and there's not much else to say. Let's just make sure I'm connected to GitHub. Okay, that's my repo here. That's my branch. And this is going to build a source artifact, which is going to go into the build phase, right? So you can see this is really it's really easy to build a pipeline. It's really just connecting things and doing things visually, right? And I guess once you have it working, you're not going to tweak it every single day. Yeah, continue. Oh, come on. Okay. So the same thing goes for all of these. So GitHub, I guess I don't need to go into details here. Maybe the only thing I want to show you is that app spec file that I mentioned. Okay, which, as you can see here, that's really the interesting part. This is where you provide the hooks to stop the application, start the application, and make sure the application is working. Okay, because one of the main problems when you're deploying is to find out whether the code you deployed actually works. right? And sometimes it's not so easy to do a meaningful check. So here you can just, with the application, deploy a script that code deploy will call to make sure that, yes, things are actually okay. Okay? And you can have some hooks before, after install, etc. Right? So not too difficult. Okay. So Jenkins, and I apologize, it's in French because Safari has the nasty property of using the system language, and I don't want to change it. But basically, this is just Jenkins, right? So this is my project, web app Tel Aviv, and I can see all the last builds, if they failed, if they succeeded, etc. Okay. So that's an EC2 instance running Jenkins, but again, you could integrate other solutions in the pipeline. Okay, so the more important thing is what is a deployment group actually? So let's look at the beta deploy group. Okay, so here I have 3 groups. So the dev is actually the one called beta. So the deployment group, how do you know that a server is inside a deployment group? Well, it's actually super simple. You need to have a tag, right? An EC2 tag on the instance called environment with a specific string in it, right? And you decide what that string is. So for me, all instances that are tagged with web app Tel Aviv dev web app, right? And if I look at the EC2 console, I should see that. This one, for example, here. That's a small screen. Okay, so this one here is tagged, right? And that's all it takes. That's all it takes. Across the entire region, because it's an EC2 instance. So code deploy is a regional service. So yes, if you want to do multi-region deployment, it's going to be 2 deployment groups. Okay. Okay, so that's all it takes. So you need to have the code deploy agent, obviously, and you need to have this tag. And of course the deployment configuration. So in my case, I will deploy instances one at a time. And that's really it. That's all there is to deployment groups. Okay. So in this case, it's for EC2. I will show you the auto-scaling one later on, right? And for production, it's exactly the same thing, except the tag is different, right? So that makes it really easy also if you have to move instances across groups if you need to do that, right? Just change the tag and instances will be promoted, so to speak, to a different environment, okay? So that's really, maybe I can just close this one here and here. Really, that's all there is to it, okay? And you can see some statistics on latest deployment and events on specific instances, etc., etc. Okay. So let's try to do a deployment, right? So I've got my web app. So you need to see the web app first. It's brilliant. So let's connect here. All right, so it's a fancy e-commerce application for dog suits. Yeah. I suspect this is gonna make me the next billionaire in the Silicon Valley. Yeah, at least. No, at least. And then finally I can go on holiday. Okay, so this is the application, right? So let's change some message in there and push the change and see the pipeline actually working. Okay, so let's change maybe this message here. All right, so what was the message again? Night on the town. All right, enjoy a night in Tel Aviv. Right. So let's commit this change. Okay, so I created a new revision. So my GitHub repo is up to date. Let's close this. Let's close this one. And so if I'm looking at my pipeline, within a few seconds, I should see some stuff happening. And of course, every time I say that, it's going to take 3 minutes. So let's see. All right, there it goes. So can you see that? Okay, so code deploy detected a new revision in GitHub, right? So it's fetching it, copying the code to S3. Hopefully that will work. And then automatically it will move to the build phase where Jenkins is going to build the code. And if that works too, but given the modification I did, we should be fine. And then it's going to deploy on this server, right? Okay, so it takes a minute to do that. All right, and now it's building, right? So it's a pipeline. So you could have multiple things happening in the pipeline at once, right? It could be, you could have many people committing to the repo and lots of stuff happening in there. Okay, so let him. We'll let code deploy finish that, and let's look at how you would deploy to different groups. So here, okay, I'm deploying to dev environment. It's a single instance. Once this is done, I will enable the transition to the prod environment, and then it will move to the auto-scaling group environment. So what's the difference between these two here? So this one is just EC2 instances tagged with a specific tag. Okay, so if manually you add more instances with this tag, it's fine, you can do that, but code will not be deployed automatically. You have to push. Explicitly the release, which you can do here, right? If you click on release change, it's going to redeploy the latest commit in the pipeline. Okay, so if you want to add servers manually and deploy manually, you can do it, right? But of course, probably you want to do that with auto scaling. So see, right now it's deploying on my server. So if you want to do auto scaling, I would say it all starts the same. You have to create a launch configuration here, right? So just describe everything you would describe to launch instances. Don't forget user data to start code deploy, etc. You would create an auto-scaling group. Yeah, that's not too small. Okay, in the typical way. Okay, so just a normal auto-scaling group. You could have also a load balancer. I have a load balancer set up here as well. Okay, and you would have your CloudWatch alarms to do the auto-scaling, etc. And then what you want is, of course, when a new instance is scaling in, you want code to be deployed automatically on that instance, right? And this is what code deploy will do right? This is the difference, okay? You say, okay, this deployment group is an auto-scaling group. Okay, so each time a new instance will be created in the auto-scaling group. Okay, we can let's try this. And so right here I've got only one instance. So let's have 3 instances in the auto-scaling group, right? So EC2 is going to start additional instances. Hopefully we see them here in a second, right? And then that event, which is the lifecycle event in EC2, that event will be received by code deploy, who will automatically trigger a deployment, right? So here we see the 2 instances showing up. So while it's doing that, let's look at the web server. Okay, so it's done deploying. It's done deploying to the beta server. Let's enable the deployment to production and production auto-scaling, right? And we can connect here and see where is my instance? Oh, that's the one here. All right, so good. We deployed a new version, right? Automatically. Okay. So if I look at quickly before it fixes it, if I look at my production server, let's see if it's done already or not. Yeah, it's done already, right? Let's look at the other one. Maybe it didn't do the second one. It did it as well. So yeah, it's quite fast. Okay. Okay, so the production deployment is complete, and then it's going to do the auto-scaling deployment. Okay. So again, the difference between these is you can do this manually, add instances to this deployment group with tags, but you have to trigger the deployment yourself. If you add the auto-scaling group to the deployment group, then every time an instance joins the auto-scaling group, it will be automatically deployed, right? So let's look at that. So I see my 2. Oh, that's what I wanted to show you, right? The launch lifecycle action. I have another session at 4, I think, last one today in this room, where I will talk a little more about lifecycle actions. But basically, these are actions that can be taken just before an instance really starts and just before an instance really terminates. So you can insert custom actions there, right? And this is exactly what code deploy does. It gets that event that an instance is starting, and it's intercepting it and doing something, right? Okay, and so if I look, we're almost out of time, but maybe we can just complete this. Okay, so the auto-scaling group here has been deployed. And my instances no, doesn't work like that. Okay, no worries. Okay, so I've got 3 instances now. I've got the one that has been that was there from the start, and the 2 others that are being deployed. So maybe I can quickly check one of those. It might be a little early, but let's do it. No, it's a little early. So you have to wait for the instance to be fully initialized. But you get the idea, right? The instance comes up, the user data script executes, code deploy starts, it will pull the code deploy backend, and the new revision will be added, right? And then obviously when the instance terminates, it terminates. Okay? So that's a cool way to do it. All right, so if you want to learn even more, there was a very good session on code deploy at reInvent, and it follows pretty much the same topics that I mentioned, but they have other demos and more stuff in there, so it could be an interesting video to watch. Of course, there's a lot of code and and user guides online. So you should go there and try them all. And I guess the best way is just to pop up the console and start playing with it. As you can see, it's very, very simple, and you can see if this is good for you or not. Okay. All right. If you got feedback, please give us feedback. We love that. And thank you so much.